Good afternoon. For those of you just joining us, we are giving everyone a few extra minutes to join the call, and then we will go ahead and get started.
It doesn't matter.
Hi, Sandy.
Hey, Chris, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So it's 2:02. We'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully, we won't have too many other people come in. So thanks you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Chris Lemon with the Kansas Board of Regents, and we are here today to discuss the Kansas Pathway to Career Initiative, which has had a couple of different names throughout its short life. Senate Bill 199 in 2019, the AOK to Work program. So moving forward, because we have so many different AOK programs running, we're trying to brand this as the Kansas Pathway to Career. And you'll have to excuse those of us who've been working on it for a while who still call it SB 199, even though that's not a great way to refer to things since the bill numbers get recycled every year. But a little bit of background on this. Senate Bill 199 was signed into law by Governor Kelly in April of 2019. So it is Kansas Statute 74-32267. And what it does is it provides an alternative path to high school equivalency for Kansas adults. We'd like to thank our friends at Goodwill Industries, in particular Chris Stanier, who was able to get this bill rolling. This is something that we've been looking for in Kansas for a long time, a way for adults to approach high school equivalency that was much more career-based and allowed them a straighter path towards high school equivalency without having to complete a college program, get their career tech ed credentials, and then go back and work towards passing the GED tests before they could go to work. Or often, as we found in our programs, students would obtain their CTE credential and go to work without obtaining high school equivalency, which really sets them up in the future for if there's job loss, harder to get back into the market, or if they try for retraining, they are back trying to get that credential again. So this really provides us a straight path from career or from education to career. So we had that bill that was signed into law April of 2019. Then after that was enrolled, we had to start the rules and regulations process, which is a very lengthy, somewhat arduous process that we just completed. Kansas Administrative Regulations 88-25-1 through 88-255 establish rules and regulations where the statute itself was a little bit unclear or didn't specify criteria. We use those administrative regulations to sort of fill in those gaps. It also provides us a path in the future to make changes that won't require going back through the entire legislative process, being bound by that legislative calendar, and then depending on if something more important comes up, having to wait year to year before we can approach that. So we really will be looking today at how we are operationalizing the statute and the regulations together. Going forward, there's no reason, I think, for those in the field to really pay attention to the statute or the regulations. Will keep you abreast of any changes. If you are interested in looking at the documentation, there's a link there to our website where all the things that we're going to discuss today can be found. We can also point you to the regulations that are on our website if you're interested in looking at the source text. Currently, our participating adult education programs is a pretty good list. We hope to bring on more programs as the Kansas Pathway to Career, as we talk about it more, as we start to bring more and more students in, recruit students, and as people find out about this alternative pathway to high school equivalency and their career tech ed credential. This list is also available on our website. We're really excited to get started with this. As I mentioned before, this has been something that many of us have hoped for a long time. And now that we finally have this in place, I'm excited for local programs to start using this and for us to help students finish their education and get to work. Probably one of the most important parts of the Kansas Pathway to Career are the eligibility requirements. If you read the statute or look at the regulations, it kind of treats these separately, but we've tried to condense them a little bit and look at it from a programmatic standpoint and kind of look at what a student would need to be issued their high school equivalency credential after they've completed all the requirements. But to be eligible, a student must be 21 years of age or older. They cannot already have a high school diploma, whether that's a regular high school diploma they got from graduating from K-12 or the high school equivalency credential from passing the GED test, whether that's in Kansas or a different state. And they can't be currently enrolled in high school, which would roll into them being enrolled in a KBOR funded adult education program. So this option is only available to our adult ed programs that are funded through WIOA Title II. And then they must be enrolled in an approved AOK pathway. In the PowerPoint that I'll send this out to everyone after we're done, but there is a link to our website. We'll go there for just a moment. I would not recommend printing this list. It is best viewed on your computer so that you can zoom in and out. As part of the rules and regulations process, we had to have a list of currently approved pathways with their associated credentials because that is something the statute requires students to complete before they are issued their high school equivalency credential. This list is static in that we had to do what is called adoption by reference. So this was a snapshot of currently approved AOK pathways as of August 30th of 2019. We will, to update this list, we will have to go through a process yearly. We will have to go back through the full rules and regulations process to update just this list. It will hopefully not be anywhere near as difficult as establishing multiple new regulations. And because we'll just be updating this list, it should be a little bit easier, but there is time involved in that process. And because of the timing, we will likely only be able to approach this once per year. Because we are now approaching a year old of this list, we'll start looking at updating this list. But this is something that we were required to have. We cannot update these on the fly. So you can look at this list to see the institutions and the approved pathways, and then the credentials that are associated with each pathway. And a student will need to complete all of the courses in a pathway and obtain each of the credentials before they can be issued a high school equivalency credential. And we'll look at that in a checklist form here in a moment. We're going to go through all of the requirements individually, and then we'll look at it on the checklist form that would need to be filled out and actually submitted to our office before KBOR would issue that high school equivalency credential.
Hey, Chris.
Yes, Matt.
Quick question. You said the AOK pathway, and just to make sure I understand correctly, they'd be considered an AOK student, so that funding would then cover all of those classes, right? This
Yes.
isn't outside of that.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
So
Hey, Chris, it's Karen.
Yes, Karen.
Question for you. Now, I know when we were starting all of this a year or so ago, we talked about had they already completed the pathway, they would still be eligible for this. Is that still the same?
Yes, there are no dates in the statute or the regulation on
Okay.
when they had to complete. There's no start date about when this goes into effect.
Okay.
So as long as a student has completed all of the requirements, we should be good to issue that
Okay, perfect.
credential.
Perfect, thank you.
So the checklist is also available on our website. I'm going to look at the checklist itself first and then show an example of one that's already been filled out. So the Kansas Pathway to Career requirements are: first, a student has to enroll and successfully pass all of the courses in an approved AOK pathway. So on this checklist, you would list each course, the credit hours, the grade, and the term that this student completed that. If the associated pathway, for example, welding has, or CNA, has an associated credential, the student must have earned that. So if it's CNA for a healthcare pathway, they must have taken and passed the CNA exam, and we'll need a copy of the credential or need to be able to verify that. They will also need a career readiness assessment, which is the work keys if they've done it previously, or if they've done it since about last April, the ACT National Career Readiness Certificate. So that has to be all level 4 scores or the silver level. And then we have menu requirements for what we're calling the high school equivalency requirements. So students in this pathway, in addition to the college courses, industry recognized credential, and the career readiness assessment, they need to further demonstrate high school equivalency in math, English language arts, and civics. For math, we have a menu of options for a student to use to demonstrate that. They can have taken and passed the GED math test, ACT math at an 18 or above, the TABE 11 and 12 at 596 scale score or above, AccuPlacer, Work Keys, College Algebra, Contemporary and Essential Math, which is a system-wide transfer course in Kansas. And similarly for English Language Arts, the GED test, ACT, TABE, AccuPlacer, Work Keys, or English Comp 1. For those, a student only has to meet one of those requirements, which we'll kind of see when we look at the filled out example here in a moment. And then a student will have to pass the Kansas Pathway to Career Civics Assessment, which is a civics assessment that was developed in our office using material from the USCIS and the Kansas Secretary of State. So give me one moment as I switch to the example. So this example uses the welding career pathway from Barton Community College, which includes 6 courses. So we would list the students, the course number, the number of credit hours in the course, the grade, and then the term that the student completed the course. That pathway has 2 associated credentials from the American Welding Society, the 1F and the 2F, which associate to the positions the student certified for. You would include the date that the student completed that credential. And then when you submit this checklist along with the supporting documentation, we will need unofficial transcripts, copies of the credential, copy of their National Career Readiness Assessment. And then however they demonstrated high school equivalency for math and English Language Arts, we would need a copy of those test results as well. So on the math and English Language Arts, you can see that this student took the GED tests. They don't have to do that. They could take 1 GED test, 1 ACT, 1 GED, 1 AccuPlacer, 2 AccuPlacer. You can combine any of those options there, but a student only has to complete 1. And then lastly, the passing score for the Kansas Pathway to Career Civics Assessment. Are there any questions on this at this point? Great. So the civics test, there's a study guide located on our website at the link. It's also the same resource page where all of our adult ed information is stored and all the information on the Kansas Pathway to Career. The test itself will be available from Sue Grostidier on request from the Adult Education Program Director. Because this was something that was developed in-house, we do not currently have multiple forms. As we establish this method and move forward, we may eventually have a question bank. This may be delivered online, but at the moment it is a paper test. There is only 1 form using the currently available questions that Sue developed working with the Secretary of State's office. So a note on that, and we will mention this again, test security for this is very important. You need to make sure that a student has studied sufficiently prior to. The test itself is not incredibly difficult, but it does require you to know a little bit about Kansas history and government and U.S. history and government. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the future, but just make sure that you are giving the student sufficient preparation, and that you are making sure that they're ready before they take the test. You're not sending the test to instructors, you're not sending the test to students, and that you're treating this like we would any other formal assessment. Any questions on that piece? Okay. Once a student has completed all of the requirements, we're asking that the adult education programs work with the students to submit this on their behalf. We are working on a better way, but as the program is new, currently we'll need all of the documentation. Will either need to be scanned and uploaded to the adult education, the file exchange in ACES, or mailed to our office. And since the documentation will include college transcripts, copies of credentials, and so forth, email is not an appropriate medium to send these in. We'll need to use our Dropbox or the US mail until we've built out a system behind this, maybe in the future if we have more usage. We also need a $25 payment to the Kansas Board of Regents. This is something that is built into the GED tests. There's a credential fee that's built into what a student pays over those 4 modules. So this fee covers the cost of a diploma and a transcript that they will receive from Parchment. We're using the same vendor as for GED at this point in time. It covers document storage, so it will be available electronically to them in the future. And it also covers the administrative fee portion of maintaining this program. And that documentation must be submitted to Sue Gross Didier through the Adult Ed File Exchange or by mail. And then I'm including the mailing address on the next page. Are there any questions about these steps or anything we've discussed up to this point? In case you have forgotten our mailing address, I think I've forgotten what the building looks like since we've been working from home for so long now. But Kansas Board of Regents, care of Sue Gross Didier at 1000 Southwest Jackson Street, Suite 520 in Topeka, Kansas, zip code 66612. And as far as an overview and looking at the programmatic requirements, that's all that we have for now. Are there any questions about students who qualify, how to utilize this?
Hey, Chris.
Yes, Matt.
The documents on the website are in PDF. Do you have that checklist in Word that we can expand and put in those courses like in your example?
Yes, we can post the PDF to the website after the meeting today.
Or a Word document?
Yeah, Word, that's what I meant.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chris, it's Umir with Next Step Alliance.
Yes, sir.
A question for you. Regarding the Kansas equivalency, certificate that they're going to be receiving, how will this transfer over to a different state?
That is a good question. What do you mean by transfer over?
So if, in case an individual decides to move out of Kansas, we want to make sure that these individuals are still able to use their certification, and also their, excuse me, not just their GED, but their actual high school equivalency. If they do decide to move out of state, will they be able to utilize these certificates just like they do here in Kansas?
Yes. So the diploma they receive is no different from the high school equivalency credential that a student gets by taking the 4 GED tests. So it's the same. I think what will be a little bit different is that it depends on if someone looks at the transcript, because the transcript will be very different. The transcript will show their college classes that they took. Their transcript will show their industry recognized credentials. It will also show the other tests. But as far as, is this a legal high school equivalency credential? Yes. It's the same credential as a student gets from the GED. So there should be no issue with them taking that from state to state and saying, do you have a high school diploma or its equivalent? Yes, they do.
Super. Wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
And to add on to that a little bit, we've actually requested, we're changing the diploma, the high school equivalency credential that's issued. The current one references the GED on the diploma document. And Sue has worked with Parchment. We're changing that so that the diploma document a student gets, whether it's by passing the GED or through this pathway, will look no different. So statutorily, they're the same, and the physical paper document will look the same as well. It's the transcript that will look different, just because of the different pathways a student took to complete that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Chris, this is Leslie from JCAE. I just have a question. Can you explain the rationale for the level set for the TABE or ACT, those numbers? How did you guys come up with TABE 596 and ACT 18? Can you just explain that process for me?
Yes. So and let me give me a moment and let me share that checklist again, Leslie. And I can give the rationale for all of the ones that we did, because there was quite a bit of discussion and debate behind those.
I can imagine.
So for the GED tests were pretty self-explanatory, because those were the passing scores a student needed to demonstrate high school equivalency already. For the ACT and Accuplacer, and the ACT, Accuplacer, college algebra, contemporary essential math, and English composition, those were all the scale scores or the courses that a student would go into if they were not considered developmental level in post-secondary education. So that's how we determine that, because we use the rationale that if you are testing above the level of developmental or remedial education in post-secondary, you have demonstrated high school equivalency. For the TABE 11 and 12, we looked at those scale scores and compared those to the scores of students who were taking and passing all 4 GED exams. And that was the level that we could comfortably say it was at those scale scores, over 90% of the students were passing the GED test. And so we kind of use that behind the scenes data to determine what would be high school equivalency using that scale score. So does that, I think that covers each of those.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
And I guess just to tag on to that a little bit with the AccuPlacer scores, those were the recommendations of the KBOR Developmental Remedial Education Group, that those scores be adopted system-wide as the cutoffs for developmental education. So there was a lot of work. We used things that other groups in KBOR had done to kind of place this where we knew that the rigor was as much, if not more, as other high school equivalency programs.
So I guess my question with the AccuPlacer, if an institution had scores that were different than that, would that institution scores be acceptable, or would the student need to take the test to reach the score?
So I think the difference there is the usage of those scores. So if a student takes the AccuPlacer and is enrolling in Johnson County Community College, if the student scored a 250, that demonstrates high school equivalency for this program. So they can use that to get their high school equivalency credential for the Kansas Pathway to Career. If Johnson County says we want students that enter college algebra to have a higher or a lower AccuPlacer score, that's a different usage, and they would need to meet that requirement. This is just, we took the recommendation from that group, which did not have to be adopted by all institutions. And we said, this is what was a general consensus, that this score and above was in the college ready category. And we use that as the requirement for the pathway to career. But that wouldn't impact anything that your campus is doing. Does that make sense?
Helps explain it. I appreciate that.
Yep.
All right.
Any other questions?
If we feel we have students, or if we do have students that meet all these requirements, we can start using this immediately. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
And if that's the case, go ahead and send us an email, and we can talk about the civics assessment portion, and we can start working with you on filling out the checklists. And that way we can get this rolling. With the 25, we've had a lot of discussions about the $25 fee, about having whether or not to have students pay KBOR directly. I would really like to avoid that where possible. We're not, even though the numbers would be low, we're not really set up to be a payment center. We can gladly discuss this a little bit more, but I think the best process would be to do similar to what we have done in the past with GED, is if a student can pay your program directly, and then your program or your institution send KBOR the money. We already have processes in place for KBOR and our adult ed programs and their parent institutions. We send money back and forth all the time. I think that would be much more clean. But we're open to discussion on that. But I think that if we can do that from the institution end, that would make things much simpler for the students. And I know that it's not directly related to the Kansas Pathway to Career. I have had some of you reach out wanting to get new AOK pathways approved. If you are thinking about a pathway, please reach out as soon as possible. Because of the timing that we'll need to go through, if it's a brand new pathway, we'll have to get that in place and approved so that we can go through that rules and regs process to update the pathway list for the Kansas Pathway to Career. So we'll want to do that as quickly as we can to time that so that as students are finishing those programs, those will be approved for issuing the high school equivalency credential.
Hey, Chris, this is Hector.
Yeah.
On the pathways, there is some that they have more than one credential.
Yes.
One credential enough to get this documentation?
They will have to pass, they'll have to obtain every credential associated with that pathway.
Thank you.
Anything else? Kind of a quiet group today. Well, if there are no other questions, that's all that we had planned today. I will hang out here for a few more minutes if anyone has anything else they'd like to discuss. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I know as we're going through and we're doing the first couple of these, we'll need to work together just to make sure that we get all the documentation right. And that we've checked all the boxes and that we have everything necessary to get the students their high school equivalency credentials. So thank you very much for joining us and have a good day.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.